All right. So again, today we're focusing on beef cattle nutrition. But if you have other animals, this material, the basic principles apply to all sorts of different animals, people, even plants in your pasture. So, but again, today we'll focus on the beef cattle. Well, that didn't work. I'm having trouble with it, Melissa. There we go. All right. So here's the outline. We're going to first identify the nutritional requirements of the animals, identify the nutrient contents of feeds, and then work on putting those together. And also the importance of getting it right, the matching the requirements and the feeds, and then look at some ration balancing resources for us so that we can put those together. All right, so when we look at our cow, calf, or any cattle group, we can see that the nutritional requirements will depend on the biological cycle, the age and size of the animal, how fast it's gaining weight, the body condition, the milk production, and the environment. So first, let's define some terms for you. With energy, we're going to use total digestible nutrients, or TDN. And you can think of it like calories, but it's total digestible nutrients is the amount of carbohydrates, protein, and fat present in a feed, along with the digestibility of that component of the feed. You add it all up, so it's a total digestible nutrients, because all of those can be used for energy. And then when we look at protein, I'm going to say crude protein, because when we measure a feed's protein content, we don't just look at the crude, just don't look at the protein, the real protein. We look at the nitrogen, percent nitrogen times 6.25 would give us the percent crude protein in the feed. And that's because protein's about 16% nitrogen. So TDN and crude protein, energy, and crude protein is what we're looking at. So this slide shows the energy. Let me get rid of something on my screen. Hide the floating meeting controls. All right. So this slide shows the energy inputs for spring calving cow. And on the x-axis, we have time. So the months January through December. And on the y-axis, we have total digestible nutrients in pounds. And we can see that 60% of the cow's energy inputs for the whole year is just for maintenance. So that's quite a good chunk. For pregnancy, it's actually only about 10% of the year's energy requirements, but it's at specific times, of course. And then lactation is 30% of the energy requirements of the animal. And I don't know why I'm having trouble with this. There we go. So the highest energy requirement comes at a time in peak lactation. And we normally breed our cows so that peak lactation is around April, May, June. So if you can think of what your pastures look like about that time, they look pretty good, hopefully. A lot of green, good high energy and protein containing pastures. And we do that on purpose to line those up so most of the feed comes from pastures. Now you can shift your calving to be at a different time, but you're going to have to feed more to the animal, for example, if you're having a fall calving. But then again, you can take advantage of market conditions by shifting that calving time. But for me, I like to see the spring calving coinciding with the flush of grass. This table shows the animal age and the class of animal. So first, let's look at the class of animals. We have 4 different ones: pregnant heifers in the last third of pregnancy, a growing steer, a dry cow in the middle third of pregnancy, and then a finishing steer. And then we have the weight, the gain in pounds per day, the crude protein requirement, and the energy requirement, TDN. So we see that the growing steer has the highest crude protein requirement out of all the animals. It's quite different from the others. So there's no need to be feeding high protein diets to some of these other animals compared to the growing steer, as it's costly. When we look at energy, the finishing steer has the highest energy requirement out of all of the animals. So definitely want to focus on that. And if you think about what the animal is putting down, its tissue, when it's growing, it's putting down a lot of muscle, and so it needs a lot of protein. When it's finishing, it's putting down fat, so it needs a lot of energy. Now this graph shows the weight and the gain and requirements of some animals. So here we have a 400-pound weaned calf and its protein requirement. And if we want it to gain half a pound, the white bar, it needs a little over almost 9% protein. If we want that calf to gain a pound a day, then we're going to have to make sure that it has over 10% protein. But if we want 1.5 pound gain on that animal, we're going to have even a higher protein requirement. Okay, so that's a 400-pound calf. What about if we're looking at a 500 and 600-pound calves? Well, they also increase their protein requirement as the rate of gain increases. But you notice that it's a lower on a percentage for the smaller animal than it is the larger animal. The 400-pound animal has to have a higher percentage in its diet. And it's a smaller animal. It's putting down more protein, but it also has a smaller rumen, needs more room. So what I'm trying to convey is you can't always guess the protein and energy requirement of these animals. You really have to focus on its weight and how fast you want it to grow. We can look at milking ability as well, and I have 2 graphs on this page. One's for TDN, one's for crude protein. And so if we look at 10 pounds per day milk production versus 20 pounds, versus 20 pounds per day, the energy requirement is quite large. Same thing with the protein requirement. It increases when you go from 10 to 20 pounds per day. So I'm sure most of you aren't out there weighing milk, but you can breed, you can choose genetics that gives you a high milking ability or a low milking ability. And if you're in an environment that has not very lush grasses, say maybe in Eastern Oregon, non-irrigated situation, then you would be careful not to breed for high milking ability. But if you're in Western Oregon where there's plenty of grass, then the 20 pounds of milk per day is a good goal. Of course, more milk for the calf should give you larger weaning weights. All right. Cattle are pretty hardy animals, and when it's really cold outside, they're pretty tough. So anything, the critical temperature, anything 30 degrees or above, they're able to stay warm. Once it starts getting below 30 degrees, you want to increase the energy that you're giving to those animals. So every 1 degree Fahrenheit below 30 degrees, you're going to want to increase the energy content of the diet for by 1%. So maybe on the west side, we don't get too cold very often, but this critical temperature is with a dry coat. So if the animal has a wet coat and no wind break, they might need some extra energy when it gets even above 30 degrees. So make sure they have a wind break and extra feed when it gets wet and cold. Let's look at body condition score and how that affects the nutrient requirements. So body condition score is a measure of energy reserves, how much fat and muscle the animal can use to supply energy for its different growth, lactation, reproduction. So the body condition score influences the reproductive capabilities of the animal. If it's very thin, then the body tells the brain, perceives the low condition through cues, and it will tell the animal not to ovulate, for example. So if it's too low of a body condition, it won't be able to breed. It also influences feed efficiency and gain. If the animal is not getting enough energy, then it won't be gaining very well. Having to use its own body condition would be hard for that. It can influence health and also maintenance requirements. It'll, and I can show you on a ration balancer where to adjust for that. But anyway, the scale of the body condition score is 1 to 9. 1 is extremely emaciated. The animal will be shaking, hardly any body fat and muscle, just kind of depleted, emaciated, and shaking. We don't see too many of those. But if it's not shaking and it seems to be okay, but it's awfully skinny, then that's a 2. 4, 5, 6 is right in the middle. And 9 is obese. So an obese animal also has problems with reproduction. It inhibits the ovulation, and the capture of a fertilized egg in that fallopian tube can get kind of smashed. Also, over-fat animals will have, instead of secretory tissue in the mammary gland, it'll have fatty tissue. So we don't want very fat young heifers. So here's some pictures of what I'm talking about. This is a body condition score 4, and it's a slightly thin animal. You can see over it's hard to tell because she's really fluffy, but you can see over the top of the back, you can see some bones. Hooks and pins are quite prominent. The tail head doesn't have very much fat at all, kind of sucked up a little bit. Not too much fat on the brisket and the neck. But when we increase in the body condition, so this is a 5, this is where we want to have our cows calve in body condition score of 5. So it's hard to tell with all this fluff. So when you're assessing body condition score, you need to have the animals in a lane or a alleyway where you can get your hands on them, touch their over the back and around across the ribs. And you can see this one's starting to get a little fat in the tail head and in the neck area. So this one's body condition score 6, and it's slightly fleshy. Now, this is where we want our heifers to have at body condition score 6. We want them, so that's a little bit better than our cows, and that's because they're still growing and they may need a little extra energy, and sometimes they can use their body to help with that, but we don't want them to have thin bodies and not be able to come back into estrus after their calving. So this is at calving for the heifers. Don't want to forget vitamin and mineral supplementation and their needs. So we want to provide animals with that supplement pretty much year round. Minerals especially. I like to use loose mineral mixes or pellets because you can more easily measure the intake of the animals. You want to measure their consumption to make sure they're eating enough. Of course, you need to protect it from weather. And sometimes we get deer and elk eating the minerals, so that's kind of hard to account for. But you can also test your feeds and the supplement, add supplement to make up the difference. But the feed tag on the mineral will say feed at 1/2 ounce per day per head, or 1 ounce or 2 ounce. So if you're measuring that, you can see, are they even eating near what they're supposed to? It's really hard to do, but at least you can take a crack at measuring their intake. And then several times throughout the year, they'll change their intake for some reason. But do the best you can, make sure they're eating at least the prescribed amount on the label. If not, you can change the salt amount, or you can add something more tasty like barley or molasses, like that. So that can work good. All right. So once we get the animal nutrient requirements taken care of, you need to identify the feed values. I guess what I should have said back in the start is that scientists have determined already how much exactly protein and energy that these animals need at the different times that I described. So there are tables in the books, and there are also online, yeah, to tell you what those numbers actually are, the amount of crude protein and energy. So next we'll identify the feed value, the crude protein and energy, and the mineral content of different feeds. So all the feeds, especially your hay, your dry or baleage, your hay, test that and figure out what that is. So you know. We also have pasture, and you can estimate that, and I'll tell you a little more about that. Crop residues like the grass seed screening pellets or corn stalks. You'll have to test to make sure what that is. But grain and seed meals are pretty consistent, so you can use book values or table values for those. And the bagged feeds, you should have the labels that will tell you what is in the feed and how to feed that. So when we look at the value of forage, whether it be harvested or in the pasture, we know that as the plant matures and gets older, it increases the fiber. So the fiber helps the seed stock, gives it structure, and holds the plant upright. And so fiber is good for that plant, but too much fiber can decrease the digestibility and the feed intake of that forage by the cow. So as the fiber increases, then the protein and energy decreases on a percentage basis. So in the lab we look at acid detergent fiber, or ADF, and we look at neutral detergent fiber, or NDF. So ADF we know is related to digestibility, and NDF is related to the feed intake. So if we look at a plant cell, I drew this primary cell wall on the outside. When the plant's young and vegetative, it's very digestible. The animals can get into the cell contents and get the sugars and the proteins and the starches, pectins, and fats. So in the rumen, the bacteria will be able to access those quite easily. But as the plant matures, the secondary cell wall thickens the cell, and it makes it more difficult for the microbes in the rumen to access those cell contents. So if we look at a cross section of this cell wall to see what's going on, we see that there is cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin in that plant cell wall. And here's where the acid detergent fiber is. It's actually a measure of the cellulose and lignin. And remember, that's related to digestibility. Those are less digestible than the hemicellulose, which is all three of them makes up neutral detergent fiber. So if you're not familiar with these terms, don't worry about it too much, but it's interesting to understand what's going on with that plant cell and why the protein and energy is hard to digest in those plants by the rumen. So when we look at the forage acid detergent fiber, we get too high of the ADF, and the dry matter digestibility really goes down quite linearly. So a high acid detergent fiber plant is going to have very low digestibility. So we don't want high fiber like that. And so that's the ADF, these two. And we look at the neutral detergent fiber. Hemicellulose is quite fluffy. So as the animal eats that, it fills the rumen and it affects the dry matter intake because the animal can only eat so much fluffy feed. So here's the forage neutral detergent fiber on the x-axis, and on the y-axis is the dry matter intake. And again, we have a linear relationship where the more fiber, the less the animal can eat. All right. So we usually say the animal can eat about 2.5% of its body weight in fiber or in feed. And we see that anything over 46, 47% NDF, the animal will have a hard time just eating that, like straw or very mature feed. So when we get our feed tested, we know what the ADF and NDF are. That's what you do there. So I took a bunch of samples, did a hay survey, and these are the results from grass and clover hay and some haylage. We're looking at the crude protein, the acid detergent fiber, the neutral detergent fiber, and then the TDN. And most of the samples, about 64% of them, were in this low protein category. There's a low protein, mid protein, and high protein. And I broke it up like that relative to animal nutrient requirements. So most of the samples were this low crude protein of 6.97%. And when we look at the rumen microbes, they need at least 7% crude protein in order to be able to function. So that anything lower than that, and it's really, you need some protein along with that feed. You have to add extra protein to that so the animals can digest it. Or if they're heavy lactating or fast growing, then you need more than this low protein hay can give us. The energy is quite low as well. There were still quite a few samples in my hay survey that had a mid protein content, so not too bad, but very few of them, 8% of the samples, had a high protein content that you would be able to feed alone in an animal that has a high requirement, lactating, growing, and finishing. Very few of our hay. And I took these samples from people that were trying to do a really good job, had a pretty good understanding of producing their hay, their grass hay, so valley grass hay. But we run into problems with rain and equipment breakdown and things like that. So the average samples of hay in Oregon is going to be on that low protein, the grass hay. So just remember that. Now, if we look at alfalfa-based forages, these are also part of samples that I took. These were all from Western Oregon. And the crude protein can be low this is just livestock producers making their own alfalfa hay. All right. This isn't like Christmas Valley or very high quality alfalfa, dairy quality alfalfa. This is producers of livestock that aren't professional alfalfa growers. So it's pretty low, but but much better than the grass hay, for example. So what I should say is that when I looked at the Oregon Hay Survey, which has hay from all over Oregon, Eastern Oregon, Central Oregon, Northern, Southern, Western, they all had hay that was mostly of a lower or mid protein, low quality hay. So even hay from another location where you think they're very good hay growers, they can have low quality hay too. So what we want to do to make sure is to test our hay. This is a hay probe that is a Penn State probe. It's about an inch, I think, in diameter, and it has serrated edges at the end. And you hook this one up to a drill. It has a drill bit there on that left side. And you can drill that into the end of a bale of hay. You take about 20 samples, subsamples, and you mix them all together and then put them in a bag, 1 gallon baggie, and you should have a half a bag or a full bag of hay to send to the lab. And then they will tell you the crude protein, the TDN, the acid detergent fiber, the neutral detergent fiber, some non-structural carbohydrates. There's a lot of things that are in that hay. But to me, the protein and the energy are what you want to look at as well, mostly. Okay, so pasture in peak growing season has just about everything the animal needs except for some minerals. And we can look at these, kind of read the pasture and look at the maturity of those plants. So for grasses, we look at vegetative to boot, and boot stage is where the seed head is inside the sheath of the plant, and it starts to increase, starts to grow and come out of the stalk, and then early head of the seeds to head where the seeds have headed out. And then at first they're quite watery or milky, and then they get dough, and then they get hard seed. So this is the maturity we're looking at of these grasses. And in the very young vegetative grass, we have crude protein can be greater than 18%. But as it goes up in maturity, the boot to early head, it's 13 to 18% crude protein. And the head out, it's 8 to 12. And once you get to the dough stage or very even hard seed, it's less than 8% crude protein. And then the energy is as well, starts high in the very vegetatively growing green soft grass, very high, nice, and decreases as we go through the maturity of the grass. And then you can also look at the acid detergent fiber and the neutral detergent fiber and see the progression of the fibers, how they increase. So in pasture, it's hard to take samples, but you can take samples and send them to the lab. And the turnaround time is pretty good on that. But you can assess your pasture to see what the quality is. It's more common to test hay, but I'll encourage you to test your pasture as well. Okay, that was grass. What about legumes and other herbs that are in your field? This graph shows this table shows the chemical composition of alfalfa as it increases in maturity. So for legumes, we look at bud to first flower to mid bloom to full bloom, and then post bloom. So those are the flowers on the alfalfa. And similarly with legumes and such. So we have crude protein is greater than 19 on those plants that have low maturity. And as they go through and mature and get more and more flowers, and also after flowers, the protein really drops. But it doesn't drop as low as the grasses. So at least the legumes hold their protein content for quite a while as they mature. And the energy is pretty high on these as well, especially the immature. And then you can also look at how the fiber increases as the plant matures. So yeah, we can look at our pastures and get a good idea. If you're trying to fatten steers, then you want to stay away from the using your pastures that are very mature, or let the cattle have the first, they get to get into the pasture before other livestock of lower nutrient requirements. And that way those high nutrient requirement animals can get the best feeds first. Yeah. All right. So that brings us to our first 30 minutes of presentation. So if anyone has any questions on identifying the nutrient requirements or the nutrient content of feeds, let's go ahead and ask some of those questions. No questions. Oh, what labs do I recommend for getting the hay tested? Okay, good question. You want to choose a laboratory that is certified to test hay. And there are certifications that test these labs and make sure that they are comparable to a standard. And so all of the labs that are in that have these certifications get pretty darn close to each other and the standard on what that is. So OSU, we have a new publication on and with lists of laboratories that you can test or you can look at. So how do we get a copy to that? I have my contact information at the end of this presentation. And so Sydney, if you want to email me, then I can give you a copy of that. Or you can go on the OSU Extension Service website and search for laboratories, and it'll give you that publication.
Shelby, I'll find that publication and also put the link in the chat.
Okay, that would be good. Thank you. All right. Is this something you can send to participants after? Sure, we can do that.
I can make a note and send that out to all of the participants because I know some weren't able to join us tonight.
Okay, yep. What I like to do in some of my classes, and I can do it, is put an email together or have a list of resources with all of those kind of publications and places you can find information that go along with the topic. Yeah. But for now, we'll get back to you on that. All right. And I have some resources that I do have in my later presentations. So hopefully those will be able to work well for you as well. All right, let's go for a little bit longer. Putting number 1 and number 2 together. So once you have the nutrient requirements of the animal identified and the nutrient content of feeds, how do you put those together so that you have a good ration for the animals? Well, I like to use a nutrition puzzle to, sorry, I gotta hide my floating. Yeah, I like to use a nutrition puzzle to demonstrate this. On one side, we have the feed value. On the other side, we have the animal requirements, maintenance, growth, pregnancy, and production. And we have the protein and energy, et cetera, of the feed. And so just matching them up so they fit well is what we want to do. So it's not too hard. We just need some tools. Let's first look at how the protein requirement of a cow that's a moderate milker, so that 10 pounds of milk, how that stacks up against the hay content that the average quality hay. So that's the low protein hay that I showed you earlier at, it was 6.9% protein, almost 7% protein. So for a mid-gestation cow, here we have, sorry, in the blue bar, we have the requirement. So it, the hay and the requirement fit pretty well together for the mid-gestation cow. But a late gestation cow, where her energy requirements start increasing due to pregnancy, we have a little bit higher requirement in protein than the average hay. And then certainly when we get into early lactation, that low quality protein hay is not going to be sufficient for her. So it's great to exactly know what your hay is and your supplements and put those together. It's more cost effective and efficient for production. But at the very least, we need to add at least 5 pounds of good quality alfalfa hay per head every day. And that's especially in early lactation and some in late gestation. So the grass might not be coming on yet. Maybe it's a little too wet to go out in the pastures and you're still feeding hay. Add a little alfalfa and that'll take you a long way. All right. That seems to work out pretty well. Let's look at the energy requirement versus the hay content. So the blue bars are the requirement of that energy of that cow. So in mid-gestation, the energy requirement's pretty low. Late gestation and early lactation, the energy requirement goes up linearly there. So, but it's not that large compared to the hay content. So the hay or grass hay actually has some decent energy to it. It will lack the protein for this cow at least. And then if you're feeding a little alfalfa hay, sometimes that can have a higher energy content than the grass hays that we have. You could also choose to feed what is called complete feeds. So that would be in a bag. I'm housed in the Douglas County Roseburg office, OSU Extension Service. So here's the Douglas County Farmers Co-op feed, bagged feed. It's a generic one actually, but it's convenient and usually consistent And it's good insurance to make sure your animals are getting the proper nutrition. Now with complete feeds, the label will tell you how to feed it. It will tell you if you need to feed any hay with it, or any minerals, or anything that you need to use, or if it's made to be a complete feed and no added other added ingredients. So read the label and check and see what it's to be fed to and how to feed that. Yes. All right. Oh, I know what I wanted to say. So if you have a complete feed and you add supplements to that, then you're not feeding a balanced ration for that animal. So if you do buy complete feeds, make sure that you know if you add extra supplements, you're not feeding the balanced ration anymore. So, okay. The importance of getting all of this right. Now we have the nutrient requirements, we have the feed requirements, we have how to put those together nicely, make it match them up. And now I want to try to encourage you to use all that scientific data and feed a ration that matches your animal requirements, because it's really important. Sometimes we think that, oh, the animal is a dry cow or a dry ewe, or only growing a little bit. And we need to know that there are many things going on inside of that animal that we don't quite understand. Just because she's a dry cow or doesn't have high nutrient requirements, it doesn't mean we can short her. All right. So I like to use something called nutrition now and later. So for the now is when you're feeding an animal currently, there's direct effects of the nutrition on the animal being fed. So direct effects of nutrition on the animal being fed, for example, rate of gain. All right, so if you're feeding an animal properly, it will have the desired rate of gain that you've chosen for that animal. Okay. It will affect the body condition of that animal. So if it's already in good condition and you're feeding it well, not too much, not too little, it should maintain its body condition. So those are the effects of the animal from the diet now. It can affect reproduction as well. We want our heifers, our young females, to be at least 65% of their mature weight at calving when they're 2 years old. And this helps with calving ease. If they're too thin or too fat, they're going to have a lot of trouble calving. And then that affects the amount of time it takes them to return to estrus after calving. And they can have an extended anestrus period and breed late compared to the rest of the herd. And then we have them later and later, and pretty soon you have calves coming in the middle of summer when they should be born in the spring. So we want to make sure what we're doing now is appropriate for that cow. And then we have nutrition now and a little bit later. We have the direct effects on the offspring. So we have the birth weight of the offspring would be affected by what the mother's been fed when it's born. And also the colostrum quality is very important. So feeding the proper amount of protein in late gestation will help produce high quality colostrum and give that calf a good immune response. So we know those things. Also weaning weight, how we're feeding the cow or how the cow's pasture is, can produce a lot of weight or a lot of milk, and a good weaning weight. So when we look at nutrition now and later, we're looking at things like fetal programming. So, the intrauterine environment affects how a baby's metabolism responds and functions for the rest of its life, not just its birth weight or its weaning weight. We're talking for the rest of its life. So it can affect their offspring through their performance. So not the mothers, but the baby that was in utero when a condition happened can affect that baby's offspring as well. Very interesting. I have a couple examples of that. And the first one is early to mid gestation diets in sheep. If we feed them 3 levels of nutrition through day 21 to 50 of their gestation, one of them would be sub-maintenance, the second one would be maintenance level, and the other one be above maintenance. So we have for mid to late gestation sheep, we know what they should be, maintenance. But if we feed them less than they need or more than they need, what happens? Well, we know that the mammary weights of lambs and the weaning weights of their offspring are improved when the maintenance diets, when they're fed, their mothers are fed maintenance diets compared to sub-maintenance. So this is not, this is the mammary weights of a little ewe lamb, fetal ewe lamb in the uterus before it's even born. When they get older after they're born and they have their own lambs, this is the effect on their lambs and their weaning weights. Okay, their mammograms and their weaning weights of their lambs. And so what researchers have found is that the fetal development of mammary secretory tissue occurs during early to mid gestation. So here's this little lamb, and early to mid gestation, the secretory tissue of this little lamb's uterus is being developed. And so if we don't feed that dry ewe, if we don't feed her the proper amount of feed, then that affects that her fetus's, her lamb's secretory tissue. So here's an example of a cow. That's a pretty big cow. And so Dr. Ford at University of Wyoming put this fetal timeline together from day 0 to 190, and then the last third of gestation. Okay, so we can see that there's many different things going on: heartbeat, limb development, rumen differentiation, cells, pancreas, liver, lungs. We know a lot of different things are going on while that fetus is still in the uterus. All right. And when we look at those, and we look at beef quality, marbling, and tenderness, for example, if we take a really good look at these marbling and tenderness, the effects of the mother's diet when the baby's in utero, we can see that cells differentiate into muscle, adipose, and connective tissue at different times. So muscle, adipose, and tough or not tissue, connective tissue, can affect that steak. And this is the steak of a baby who's in utero. So that's influenced by the maternal diet as well as the diet of that calf once it's weaned and is put on a finishing diet. So Dr. Dew and others at Washington State University found out there's this marbling window, right? And we usually look at it as somewhere later in that calf's life and under slaughter. We can look at the adipocytes, so the fat cells hypertrophy, how big they are, and the hyperplasia, how many they are. And we can look at the intramuscular fat at birth. That steer, for example, that you're going to fatten for a steak, it's already has the number of fat cells determined before birth for the intramuscular fat, the intermuscular fat, the intramuscular fat, subcutaneous fat, visceral fat. So early in life, it gets that. And then, so when you have the number of fat cells, then you can make those fat cells bigger as the animal's older before slaughter. But you need the number of fat cells to be large as well as the size of the fat cells. So the diet of the dam is very important when that calf. So he looked at the different cells, the stem cells, which can differentiate into either the muscle cell or the fat cell. And so these progenitor cells will go into different types of muscle or different types of fat cells. And these are all done at different times of the fetal development. So what I'm trying to explain is that there are so much more than what we can see going on when we're feeding those mother cows or other animals. We want to make sure we get it right. And then epigenetics is the intrauterine environment can alter gene expression patterns of an animal after birth. And so we've learned more and more about that in cattle and in people as well. All right. So that's my second 30 minutes. Does anyone have any questions on putting those nutrient requirements and feeds together in the nutrition puzzle and the importance of getting it right? I see Melissa put the soil test information there. Very good. How about a drink of water, a little stretch? So this all works for sheep and goats and horses and people and dogs and cats and everything. So as we're feeding our animals, we want to keep all these things in mind. And if you're new to this and it's a bit much, no problem. I can talk about this all day long. I like it. So if you want to call and visit about it, that's fine. We have lots of fact sheets on our OSU Extension Service website explaining little tidbits of everything I've talked about today. So those are always helpful. All right. Are you all ready for some ration balancing? Yes? No. All right. This is a little bit tougher, but it's not actually too hard because we have a lot of tools that we can use. All right. So first we have a beef cattle nutrition workbook that several of the extension field faculty and campus specialists, it's been 20 years already since we did that, but it's a time-tested book, excuse me, and it has different chapters in there that help you through everything. Like it has worksheets that that prompt you to write down information on the very specific animal you're trying to feed. It has tables with all of the nutrient requirements listed, so you can find your late gestation cow that weighs, 1,200 pounds, and find the protein and the energy requirement of that animal. You can go to another chapter on forage value and evaluating feeds, and I'll give you clues on how to determine that, just as we talked about earlier in the presentation. There's a chapter on minerals and vitamins, and then there's a ration balancing. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, chapter 5. Ration balancing chapter that's really good. And each of these chapters have worksheets in there. That's why we call it a workbook. And so you can fill in your own information on your animals and work through exactly how to put together these rations for the animals. And then has a part on supplements, a chapter on supplements, and it looks at if you need protein, you should look at the cost of a supplement based on the cost per pound of item that you need of protein. So of course we always look at hay on the cost per ton. So if you wanted to add some alfalfa hay, you would value that alfalfa hay based on the cost per pound of protein, or you can do it on a protein block or a lick tank. You'll find that alfalfa is generally the least expensive supplement for protein. Good old alfalfa hay. And it also has a little bit of information about supplementing, infrequent supplementation. For example, you can feed 3 days worth of protein every 3 days. Remember that 5 pounds of alfalfa that I suggested putting in late lactation cows? Instead of taking 5 pounds per head per day every day out to the cows, you can place 15 pounds every 3 days out in the field. And cows are more likely to eat their share, so it's eaten more evenly among the animals in the herd. And they only need protein every 3 days because they have this large rumen fermentation vat with microbes in there. And any extra protein in the rumen is recycled through, well, it gets released as ammonia, it gets cycled through the liver and back through the saliva and into the rumen again as urea. And so it's a very efficient nitrogen cycling machine there. And so supplementing every 3 days with alfalfa is less costly and less time consuming. So those are some really cool ideas that are in this supplement and ration balancing part. There's also a chapter on body condition and a chapter on heifer nutrition and development. And those are all really, really good resources. So I have the URL at the bottom, and I've put in a QR code that if you point your camera at on a smartphone, don't take the picture, just point the camera at that, and then you will see a little yellow address, URL. I think it'll say Oregon State. And you just touch that yellow words URL, and it will take you to this address. Okay, so hopefully you can get through that. So in this workbook, it shows you how to do a simple ration balancing method called the Pearson Square. So this is in the beef nutrition workbook. And Dr. Pearson was a mathematician, and he used this Pearson Square method to determine 2 items to balance them out to meet a specific point. All right, didn't explain that very well. So how to combine two substances to make them a target value. So let's look at this for balancing for TDN, all right, using a Pearson square. So this is heifers that have a energy requirement of 68% TDN. So in the very middle, you put the 68.5. At the top, you put the TDN of the meadow hay. You know that because you tested the hay. You put the TDN of the ground barley down here, and you got that value from a book, because most of our grains, you can use book values easy. They're pretty consistent. So you take, you go from the meadow hay, you take down and across the absolute difference. So don't worry about whether it comes out negative or positive. The difference between 68 and 50 is 18.5. And then you take the ground barley and take the value of that and go up and across the difference between that. And it's 6.2. And then you take those differences and you add them up and it comes to 25. And you use that to divide this value that you got by going up and across or down and across. And that tells you the proportion of meadow hay that should be in this ration to give you 68.5% TDN. So 26% meadow hay and 74% ground barley. That's a lot of ground barley, but it's getting these heifers growing very, very well. You can feed 26% hay and that much ground barley. You would have to step up slowly over a period of 2 to 4 weeks to get to that point. But as long as the animals have 10% fiber to keep the rumen functioning, it's fine to feed them that much grain. So if we take this meadow hay ground barley mix, okay, this ration that's 74% barley and 26% meadow hay, it's going to be 68.5% energy. And we can also estimate the protein of those two. So the protein content of the hay and barley mix is 9.7, but the animal's nutrient requirement is 10.3. It's a little short. So we're going to have to add a seed meal, cottonseed meal, soybean meal. Those are already always really high, like 40-45% protein, and do the same up and across the difference, down and across the difference of that. Add these up, use it as a divisor for the values that you got earlier, and it shows you that 98% of the diet is going to be that hay barley mix, and 2% of the diet needs to be cottonseed meal, and therefore you can have this balanced ration for protein and energy. So Pearson square again takes the amount of the proportion of 2 ingredients to mix to get to that point. Since you can only do 2 at a time, we have this hay barley mixture versus cottonseed meal, whereas before we had the hay and the barley separate. So the beef nutrition workbook has this Pearson square method described probably a lot, well, I know a lot better than I just did, but and it's there for you to see, so you can look at that pretty well. So what other methods can we use if we don't want to use the Pearson square? Ration balancing software, of course. I like using the Pearson square and working through the requirements and the feed values by hand using that workbook, because then it seals in your brain what it is you're trying to do. And then when you use the calculator, then you're more likely to get a proper ration and be able to make that ration balancing software work for you if you understand the basics of what it's trying to do. So struggle through the Pearson square first, please, and then go to this OSU calculator. So the OSU calculator is on an OSU, the Eastern Oregon Agricultural Research Center in Burns. They have a beef cattle website, and they have a forage evaluation section. So you have to scroll down and you see the calculator software that you can download onto your own computer and the instructions. Unfortunately, this is Oklahoma State University, not Oregon State University, but Oregon State University, Dr. David Bonard, he did put together these, made it applicable to Oregon forages. So it is kind of customized for Oregon, even though it's Oklahoma State University, but it's still really good software. And Dr. Bonard and then Dr. Juliana Ranches, our beef specialist, she is available to help with that, and I can help you as well. But it's pretty interesting. So here's the QR code to the OSU calculator on the Oregon State University website. And I will show you a little bit about it, what it does. Hopefully you can see my cursor. So you put the date on, and you can put your information here, and the situation you're going to just write here, late gestation cows. So say you have 100 cows and they were bred in the middle of June somewhere, and not 2018 but 2023, all right, or 2024, yeah. And then calf age at weaning, we're going to have a 205 average weaning date for the calves. And the stage of production is going to be 1. 1 is mid-gestation. So these dates will change for you when you put the right date here. So you choose the code based on where these animals are in their biological cycle. All right. And then so you have a feeding period. So you want to know what ration to feed them from this range of dates here, and how many days are in the feeding, 24. You put the initial weight of the cow, the body condition score of the cow. If it's really thin, you're going to want it to gain a little weight. So a 5, it won't have the cows making much weight gain at all, other than for the fetal weight increase. Expected calf birth weight, you know, your average birth weight's about 75 pounds. You can put in the breed. There's about 24 different breeds you can put in there. And then, so that's all the information you put in there. And then, but there is a tab where you put in your own hay that you, and supplements that you have protein and energy requirements for. And this will give you an output that has the proportions of all those feeds so that it meets the nutrient requirements of these animals. And what's really good is you can change this stage of production, and it'll spit out another one really quickly for you without having to add too much of this already again. So it gives you a really good printout. It's not hard to use once you get used to it, and you do have help with us to use that. All right. So I haven't talked much about growing and finishing cattle, because that is a little bit, it's less common in Oregon to be growing and finishing cattle. However, the last 10, 20 years, we've seen a lot of people actually doing a lot of grass finishing and some grain finishing as well. So I thought it'd be good to go ahead and touch on that since we have some time left. So there's a few things here. These 3 different steers are all fed, fattened, ready to be harvested to grade high choice or better. But you see these, this is a small frame, this is a medium frame, and this is a large frame steer. They're all finished to the same endpoint degree of finish, but of course they're going to be different weights. You know, maybe 1100 to 1400. I don't know exactly, but those are all heavily muscled beef, fat, very nice finished animals. So on your animal, you need to measure the frame score. So when the animal is standing on a flat surface, if you can bring it into the chute or to the alley before you make it go into the chute, and or let it relax a little bit and use a measuring stick, you can see how many inches it is. And then there's tables that you can go and find, and I'll have to put that as well as my list of labs there. So it's called frame score in feeder cattle. And it'll suggest a weight that it should be finished to. Choose a finishing weight. And then you have to make a slaughter date, sometimes well in advance of before you even have the animal ready, for sure. Well in advance, but sometimes even before you have the animal. And then okay, you know what the current weight is, you know what the slaughter weight should be, and you know how many days you have to get that to finish it. So that gives you a rate of gain. So of course you have to know the weight of the animals. And once you have the animal picked out, the frame score, the rate of gain, then you go to the tables, the nutrient requirement tables, and those are in that nutrition workbook. The National Research Council Nutrient Requirements of Animals has tables, and that's where we got those. And you can pick out the protein and energy over the different phases of that animal's life that you would need to get that finished. And then you're going to have to be good at estimating the finish on the cattle. You need to look at them. You need to fill them. There's some really cool websites with how to know your animal's finished. Oregon State University has a small scale meat farming website with really good videos on how to do that, how to estimate the finish. You can go to fair a lot of times and look at the finish, the market cattle, and listen to the judge and see what they're talking about, how they know that these animals are finished. And also go to the slaughterhouse. Once your animal's slaughtered, you can look at the animal's carcass and say, oh yeah, I did that just right. All right. So what I'm talking about is the frame. This animal is small, short, and short in height and length compared to its cohorts, other animals in the herd. This one's medium frame, this one's a large frame, meaning for its age, it's taller and longer than other animals. So of course, they're going to weigh different, right? And then we look at muscle thickness, 1, 2, 3, 4, some dairy character, no dairy character. And so this will help you choose the finishing weight that you want your animal, and help you assess the nutrient requirements that it needs so you can hit that slaughter date just right. So I don't know why I put that in second. Oh, to tell you that the nutrient requirements for growing and finishing animals are in this first chapter, as well as the nutrient requirements for the beef cow as she's pregnant, and also for developing heifers. All right. So the OSU calculator that Oregon State University's put together is only adjusted for Oregon for the beef cows. So for the growing and finishing cattle, you need to go to the Oklahoma State University Extension website and get their growing and finishing cattle for the software to get that. And I've used both of them. It's not adjusted for Oregon, but it gets pretty close to a good finish for animals. And I've helped a few people through that, and it seems to be working just fine. So of course we have alternatives to all this ration balancing that we have. Custom balance rations. It's costly, but if you hire a nutritionist, it can pay to have that proper nutrition. Bagged feeds, a lot of the 4-H FFA youth will use bagged feeds, just complete feeds or bagged feeds. But that's very expensive. But you need to they follow the instructions and it works out good for them. All right, so that is my whirlwind of nutrition. Of course, there's a lot of different levels of this information that I left out. But as you learn and you revisit this information, then you can appreciate all the details and get more and more in depth in that. And then working with either your nutritionist or extension faculty in the field, or Dr. Bonard or Dr. Ranches as well can help you. All right. So here's my contact information and my telephone number and my email. And I also, besides beef cattle, I work with sheep and goats, and then nutrition for pastures as well, okay? Because we want the right conditions in our pasture, the right amount of nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium in our fertilizer, so that grows well. So I do pastures and grazing management and hay production. So there's a QR code for my website, OSU Extension Douglas County. I have my own livestock and forages section, and it has all my favorite extension publications listed there. So that can be handy as well for you. All right. So that's what I have for us. And it's about 10 minutes left in the class. And so we can have time for questions. Let me look at something here. Oh, you're welcome. I see a few thank yous. I think that might be let me just check it here. Yeah, that's the livestock and forages.